Welcome to the Good Growth Podcast, brought to you by BGF, the most active equity investor in the UK and Ireland. In this episode, Jimmy is joined by Roshni Bandesha, Head of ESG at BGF. Roshni explains ESG practically, emphasising the often overlooked social aspect. She advises on when entrepreneurs should consider ESG and the importance of businesses allocating responsibility early on.
Can you tell us your name and your role at BGF?
I'm Roshni Bandesha. I'm the head of ESG and sustainability at BGF.
And what is the job of being head of ESG and sustainability?
Fundamentally, it means being a thought partner for our portfolio companies and helping them understand what ESG means for them.
Yeah.
So simply put, ESG means your environmental performance, your social performance, and your governance performance. And it is made up of many different elements. So for example, when you talk about a business's environmental performance, you could be talking about their emissions, you could be talking about their waste.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about the social performance, you could be talking about how they treat their employees, how they look after their customers. And we talk about governance, you could be thinking about the corporate governance standards they are having, but also emerging governance risks like cybersecurity. So it means a lot of different things. That's why it's really important to think about ESG in the context of the size of the business and the sector of the business that you're in. And my role is to translate this for BGF portfolio companies because they often come into this with either a siloed view of this is what I think ESG is, or completely new to the concept, essentially.
And can you unpack the social one for us a bit more? Because I think people sort of have a natural kind of understanding of the environment and governance to a degree.
Yeah.
But I think social is the sort of almost the black sheep of the family of ESG. Like what just unpack the social side of it a bit more for us.
It's really interesting you picked up that because as I've worked in this space for quite some time, I think we focus a lot on the E because that's the exciting bit in some ways, and you can see some practical changes and the governance side. But we often forget that businesses essentially exist for the people that they're trying to serve with the help of the people that they have. So you need to get them to actually buy into your environmental strategy or your governance strategy in order to be productive, to be able to attract new customers. So when we think about the social side of the businesses, we are trying to think through, in your employee base, do you essentially have a way to enhance their productivity by being more inclusive in the way you hire, you train, you grow, and you provide them opportunities? That can go into many different ways. It could mean that could you use your business, for example, for a source of good? So you're employing from different backgrounds. Could it mean that you're helping people retrain themselves? And then the other side of social is actually your customers plus your communities.
Okay, right.
So thinking through, if you are a tea producer, for example, yes, you want to be financially successful, but you are having an impact on your customers who may not fully know the financial benefits or the ill health benefits of your tea. How do you then treat them fairly? How do you make them understand what you are trying to achieve? And then that cascades into the community because customers and communities don't sit separate. Your customers are going to come from the communities that you're trying to exist in.
Yeah.
So that's the three sort of groups almost of people who are quite critical to the success of the business.
Yeah.
But because there's no representation oftentimes, who represents your entire consumer base, who represent an entire community, businesses sort of have what I think is a more natural inclination of believing what they want to believe.
Yes. So that's it, because I think, when entrepreneurs look at it and business leaders, they think, well, getting my governance structures right will probably help run the business better in the long term.
Yeah.
And so on. And people understand why they need to be more environmentally friendly, etc. But it is that S that sort of gets forgotten about a little bit or a bit more misunderstood. When should entrepreneurs start thinking about ESG and the implications of it?
I think the thinking behind ESG is often embedded in entrepreneurs. So if you ask any entrepreneur, why did you start the business? Most of them would say two things. And I'm talking about entrepreneurs who have a decent size of a team. So they're not a one-man band. They would say, I've started because I wanted to solve this challenge.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this because I really want to lead my team well. So it's always related to the people side of it. So the S of ESG, like you were saying, is embedded right from the beginning, because you are trying to create change in the world through your product, but also by working with people. What I think is interesting in ESG is you will have different focus points across E, S, and G as you grow, which you need to be
Yes.
thoughtful around. So there's no point in being a 20-person business and having a comprehensive corporate governance structure, which is probably more useful for a business like 150
Yes.
people. So you need to scale back and you need to think about what's possible. But at the same time, certain principles, doing things like listening to your employees regularly, having ways that people can raise concerns anonymously, those principles need to be embedded from day one. They can't be retrofitted because the culture of the business has already been set.
Yeah. Okay. But so you say that, it's not kind of for one-man bands, etc., and that's fair enough. But where should people start thinking about it? Because you say those principles have to be in place from day one.
Mhm.
Well, when you've just got one employee, it's quite difficult to have anonymous reporting, for example. Where does this sort of go? Like, is it sort of 10 people we should start thinking about this stuff? It obviously depends on the sector as well, right?
Yes. No, that's a fair question. And the way that so the kind of portfolio companies we are looking at, I think if you are below 50 people, that's when you start putting in the structure. So between 20 to 50 is quite useful in just figuring out what do we want our core policies across our environmental responsibilities to be, our social responsibilities to be, and our governance responsibilities to be. And that can be added on as you grow, essentially. So I would say 20 to 50 have the first basic structures ready. And then as you scale up, which potentially people scale up quite fast at that stage, then you have to be very adaptive in terms of, well, what does it mean now? If we are expanding the number of offices we are going to have, what does it mean for our business from a cost and environmental perspective, for example?
And should companies have these written down?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the fundamental sort of growing up sometimes that businesses have to do. When you are sub 20 people, everybody knows and everybody's speaking the same language.
Yeah.
The minute you grow larger than that, the CEO is not necessarily going to be able to be intervening in everything.
Yeah.
So unless you have it written down, I think there is a risk that people with different understanding of the issues and people who might find themselves in challenging situations then don't have a simplistic way to solve it.
Yeah. And one of the kind of 4 key components you talk about is the transparency issue. So should it be published publicly as well on websites?
The publication around your ESG is, from an external audience, is much more about your core principles, your purpose. Are you doing the right thing? Essentially, who's going to come to your website? It will be your customers, sometimes the regulators if they think you're doing something wrong, and your communities. And for them, what they need to understand is, are you looking at the key risks that your business poses to us?
Yeah.
And do you have a view on them? That's essentially what people are looking for. Your internal policies are for your employees. And over there, I think you need to be very aggressive in how often you talk about them, because you want your employees to believe that we are looking at your safety, whether it's mental safety, physical safety, in a holistic manner. Here's what we've promised to deliver, and this is the path forward.
Yeah. Because I suppose ESG itself as a concept is changing as well, what it means to be, because actually it's been around for close to a decade now. At the start of that decade, mental health probably wouldn't have been as big of a thing, whereas that has now. So not only does your company need to adapt, but also the whole system is as well. So you're never going to quite have it. It's never going to be a finished article, as it were. And talk to us about the other principles that you kind of look at as well, because part of your role here, right, is to have that first conversation with entrepreneurs about ESG, right? So talk us through what you would say to them normally.
I think I quite enjoy the conversations with entrepreneurs, because sometimes you are entering a conversation with the other person is quite skeptical and almost on the defensive. So they think, oh my God, here's this person who's going to tell me about what I need to be doing. So absolutely, that's not the fun part.
Here's the ESG police.
Yeah, here's the ESG police. And then you're sitting there going like, no, that's not what I do. So that's one part of it. The second part of it, as I said, is certain people who have, well, I really care about the environment and they want to spend the whole hour just talking about them. So I fundamentally try to talk about two things with them, which is, first of all, what is the principle of what we're trying to achieve, or an investor should be trying to achieve? And in my view, it is the difference between, are you a responsible business or are you doing business responsibly?
Mhm.
So if you're doing business responsibly, that means I've got my documents in place, no regulator can hold me accountable because I've tick marked everything you needed. But if you're a responsible business, that means you recognize that you're having an impact on different stakeholders, that beyond your investors and your shareholders, there's a whole host of either people or the planet that is going to be impacted by how you grow and behave.
Yeah.
And that's the principle of what we're trying to build and connect with companies. So it's not about, if you show me all the policies you've got, you're ready to be part of the BGF portfolio. So that's the fundamental difference between the two. And then how we translate that into what does it practically mean for them. It's like I'm looking for 4 things that they can demonstrate. And it could be in many different shapes and forms. The first is a strategy. So just like your financial and operational business success is based on what do you want to do over the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, your environmental, social, and governance also needs to have some form of strategy answering the question, what and why. Then there needs to be accountability. Who within the business really owns this area and leverages other people also to deliver it? And then comes the implementation, which is, here's the 3 key projects that we want to deliver over the next 3 years across ESG, and it's linked back to our strategy. And the fourth is the transparency.
Yeah.
Which is, you are then communicating it very well to your investors, to your consumers, to your employees, because that's where a lot of the value sits. Now, the issue with most portfolio companies or non-portfolio companies is they'll spend a lot of time on implementation. It'll be one person who's really passionate about a recycling project and has started that off. And there will be some level of accountability that, yes, the CFO or the CEO believes in it. And what gets left behind is strategy. The question, why did we even need to do a recycling project? And the transparency that you're doing all this good work, but who knows about it? Who can actually contribute or actually add to the value of it?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get CEOs to start thinking about strategically. I don't want you to do 20 ESG things. I want you to do 3, but that fits this sort of cycle of growth, as I think.
And how does it work in terms of, where do you come into the conversation with the entrepreneurs, right? Is this pre-investment, post-investment?
Pre-investment, I think there's a value in having conversation with 2 types of businesses. The first is who are either creating ESG products or are really purpose aligned, because for them, it's very critical to work with an investor who has the same DNA.
Yeah.
So I often get on in the conversation to help them understand what they will receive from BGF. The second kind of conversation is where we think that there are certain challenges in the business that we should be addressing upfront. So, for example, we do look at businesses with complex supply chains in emerging markets. So I think it's useful for myself to be included in those conversations pre-investment, so it's a fair understanding of the risks. But majority of my work starts post-investment, because we have a structured way of getting a baseline for the companies as part of the ESG diligence. And then post-investment, we have the value creation team who speaks to the CEO, CFO, COO. And I'm part of that conversation about, we invested in you for the long term. What are your plans for ESG? Here are some examples. I think examples really speak to them.
Yes.
Because if you've never had a private equity investor before, you're almost in the, what do I do?
Yeah, totally.
How do I use you? So you have to give them the assurance that, what does support in a minority structure mean? How are companies like yourself using our support? And also, when is it right to reach out? Because they want to have an easy way to being like, well, that's useful for me to know.
Okay, so that brings us neatly on to examples. Can you give us some examples of companies that have implemented these from the portfolio, or not even from the portfolio, actually, like of companies that have brought in innovative ways of ESG?
Let's think about the sort of 4 pillars that we spoke about. I think majority of my focus, as I said, is getting people to understand their strategy. So we have done a really big push in getting companies to start owning and developing their ESG strategies. So over there, we have a number of companies like Pharmacy to You and another one called Planix, who are all right now in the process of building their ESG strategy. So how you do that is you do a materiality assessment. In simple terms, you try to understand what are the material impacts that ESG factors has on my business. So for example, if the regulation tomorrow changes on how I need to be managing my emissions, it's going to have material financial impact. So I need to be aware of that. But also it looks at what are the impacts that I'm having on my customers, my communities, and my employees. So they do this almost strategy setting with the help of these stakeholders to narrow down on the list of things that they can implement and improve upon.
So there's almost like an ESG kind of flow chart type thing then.
Yes, because how else would the CEO know, like, this is more important than this? Like, there has to be relative importance that has to be given. So that's where the concept of double materiality comes in, where you as a business are understanding that there are financial risks, but there are also broader impact risks that we need to put into our strategy. Now, the end result could be very different. So Pharmacy to You is a healthcare business. It has essentially consumers who are sitting at their home getting medical products or basically pharmaceutical products from the business delivered to themselves. So when they did their materiality assessment, they figured out what really matters is actually reducing their packaging, because that's having a huge environmental impact and also is important from a cost perspective. The second thing was talent acquisition, because they are a small firm that is constantly needing to grow. And the third thing was actually community engagement. If your customers are sitting in communities, they're used to walking down to the local pharmacy, you're almost getting them to change that model. So how do you make sure that you get the community to buy into the business model? So that was for them.
And and that's interesting. How do you do that then?
So that's where the stakeholder engagement comes in. So you recognize the list of issues or opportunities, and then you have engagements either through in-person engagements or through surveys, wherein you get the feedback from these different stakeholders. And it gives you a really clear view of where should my strategy be over the next 2 to 3 years. It's as much a science as it is an art. So there isn't like one specific answer, but it often shows blind spots that you probably haven't thought about. You're probably out there thinking, I'm marketing, why isn't my product selling? Well, the actual thing is it's a question of trust. Because the community hasn't fully understood what you're trying to deliver.
Can you give us some other examples of where the kind of ESG flowchart that we've talked about, where companies have gone through it? Because I think it really brings it alive for entrepreneurs to think about it in that way.
Sure. If we just build on this piece, like assuming that you have built your ideas around, well, this is a strategy, right? We have seen businesses really move towards developing specific net zero targets. So if you look at the portfolio right now, we have almost seen a 50% increase in people just keeping environmental targets. So assuming you as a business have a strategy plan that we want to be better on the environmental side, we've seen then businesses really rope in oftentimes the COO or the CFO in understanding how do we build this accountability. So what the COO or CFO are seen doing in these businesses is that they can't be the champion of it all. So they are setting up what they may call a climate impact group. So this might be either heads of different departments or just employees who are really passionate about it. Because the other part we've seen is as your workforce gets younger, you will be quite surprised, actually refreshed by how much they care about the environment and their impact. So they are starting to bring them in some kind of employee group opportunity to hear their voices. But also if something is decided, like for example, we need to get better data on our environmental impact, these become your champions. From there, then we've seen different type of implementations. So certain businesses that have a huge hybrid model are becoming more thoughtful around actually capturing what employee commuting is look like. Other businesses that have traditional offices are making a switch to renewable energy, for example. And then businesses are moving towards transparency. So for example, we've seen businesses sign up to certain principles like race to net zero, or having net zero plans that are now available on their website. So because they were able to have that strategy around we need to be net zero positive, they got the right people were enabled with the right structures, and then they were able to implement programs which are either 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and most critically also talk about it internally and externally.
And what's the average year that companies are looking to go net zero by? Because there's lots
Right now, most businesses are 2030.
Yeah.
I think they are driven by the market where everybody else is, and 2030 is quite a key name. We have a few businesses that are ahead of the curve because sustainability is core part of their strategy anyway. So we have a business called BF1 that works with automotive sector essentially. So they are carbon negative. So because they've been looking at the environmental side as a key driver for their cost as well. So they have been doing it for the last 5 years before sort of becoming net zero was the main thing.
Yeah.
So they are already carbon negative, and you've got other businesses like Gusto who already know that their customers care about the packaging in which they are getting their food delivered.
Yeah.
So they are working quite hard that if they can hit the net zero targets before 2030, that's better for them from a financial perspective as well.
Yeah, because it will increase customer demand. And what's the sort of, where are we in the space of standardization for these things? Because, and how much more interest are we seeing in the area as well?
By standardization, do you mean how we measure and we communicate? So the measurement standardization is being largely driven by the regulations. And I think where it's coming from is the EU. So the EU over the last, I would say, 5 years has really made a big push in terms of all businesses of a certain type need to be reporting the same kinds of information.
Yeah.
And that is now flowing into the UK as well. So UK's sustainability reporting directives is going to essentially require all businesses which are on the larger side to be articulating the financial impact of sustainability, but also their outward impact. So there is the principle that is being standardized that you need to be talking about both. You can no longer just talk about one stakeholder, which is my investor and my shareholders.
Yeah.
In terms of what needs to be tracked, right, the actual metrics, I think we have a way to go because right now there still are far too many metrics. So when you talk about environmental, we're asking the same set of questions to an IT firm as we would be to an automotive manufacturer. So we're not in a place where we have that sort of agreement on, well, for tech businesses, these are the 6 things that we need to be asking. And where we have seen standardization come in is in different pockets. So private sector investors are coming together to agree on, well, if we are in the same business sector and model, what should we all be asking our businesses? So you're seeing some kind of standardization come over there. When it comes to transparency or the reporting side, I think that's still going to be driven largely by the regulation. So whatever the regulation says, it's going to be part of the accounting standards. And that's why you see a lot of focus from KPMG and all the big audit firms to be ready to actually assure the information that businesses are providing on their sustainability strategies.
And presumably you see quite a big opportunity for AI in this space, right? In terms of it will be able to go through and check these processes and check the information on companies. But you have a wry smile for those listeners not watching when I mentioned that.
The smile is from, AI apparently is going to solve all our world and life challenges. So in the last, I think, 6 months, I have spoken to more ESG AI companies that I can remember. Do I think that it will bring a lot of efficiency in responding to some of the complicated questions around what should I be writing? Yes, that is possible. Even today, actually, if you go to ChatGPT and you're like, I need to make an ESG policy, I'm this kind of a business of this size, you get a fair understanding of what you need to be delivered. It's very bog standard, but you will have a framework. Now, where AI will not be able to play a role, my view is understanding the impact of what is being disclosed. There's a difference between saying, yes, we have this certification, but is that actually a valuable certification for this particular business? I don't necessarily think AI will be able to bring those insights in. So for the process efficiency of making the data collection, the report writing may be easier, yes. But the thinking of, so what? That's not right now in the realm of AI.
How many companies do you speak to a year? I mean, that's an interesting.
I think about my role to be a resource for the portfolio companies,
Yeah.
and I naturally enjoy talking to people, so it works well for me. At minimum, 90 to 100 companies
Yeah.
in a year, and within those, I try to do a couple of things. First is try to understand, can their problem be solved with one or two calls, in which case I become a quote unquote internal consultant for them.
Mhm.
Second thing is, can they actually learn from the broader portfolio? So what are the cross-learning opportunities that we have? Is there something on portfolio exchange they can learn from? Because it really helps for a CEO or a COO to learn from somebody else.
And that's just to explain the portfolio exchange. That's basically the sort of peer-to-peer network that
Yes.
BGF have for yeah.
Exactly. I think about it as a cross between LinkedIn and Instagram for us. So people can talk and learn from each other. And then the third thing that I try to do through those engagements is there a really long-term value add opportunity with the help of one of our experts? So we have a huge talent pool called Expertise on Demand. And if there is a business, for example, we want to create a net zero plan, I'd rather that they work with a trusted expert that BGF has vetted
Yeah.
and can trust them to develop this, than try to sort of go out in the dark and do it themselves.
Yeah.
So it's one of these three. But most importantly, it's also a way for the business or the senior leadership team over to know that they have a trusted advisor that they can speak with when it comes to E, S, or G.
Yeah. And that's really, so you're almost like a ESG router in terms of being
Yeah.
able to sort of send them around the places.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just what you always wanted to be called, I'm sure.
Yeah, ESG router, yeah.
Tell us about the interest in the area more broadly. So not only are you seeing more ESG companies, whether they be AI or not, but also you were talking just beforehand about the sort of amount of numbers that are increasing, sort of 25, 40%. Give us some insight into that.
So the interest in ESG is coming from two ways. One is, how can we develop a product that is solving one of the three challenges? So we're seeing a number of companies, especially in clean tech, that is helping that. We're seeing in female-led investments that are solving those specific problems. But then there's also the bigger question around existing companies on how do we transform our current products to be more fit for the low carbon economy, or for the economy that is going to be more gender inclusive, for example. So that's the kind of innovation that we're seeing in different types of businesses as they try to run in this particular space. We have, for example, on the traditional ESG side, businesses like NASA Data, who started, I think, not too long ago, a couple of years ago. And they have, their tagline is sort of less admin, more ESG. So they are essentially existing to make ESG reporting easier and more transformative for listed businesses. On the other side, we have businesses, especially whether in the travel sector or traditional products, in thinking about how do we make these more green in certain ways. And I'm working with both types to help them understand the market opportunity. Where you will start seeing a lot of sort of inbound requests come in is for people who are like, we'll just make your ESG data a bit better. But I think it's all about what do you do with the data and the information. And that hasn't really been cracked.
Yeah, because I suppose that you touched on the nub of it there of entrepreneurs that are worried about ESG is just that it's an admin.
Yep.
It's just more admin, right? Which is, nobody goes into entrepreneurship to do more admin, right? So that's the sort of real challenge of it. But that's partly where you can help with these conversations, right?
Yes, because fundamentally I don't think any investor wants you to be reporting for the sake of reporting, that they're with you. Time is precious for you as well. But at the same time, you have to recognize that you are having an impact.
Yeah.
So how well do you do it, and how transformatively you do it is what is critical at the end of the day.
Yeah. And talk to us a bit about the BGF Foundation as well, because I know you're very involved in that, quite recently set up in 2022. Just explain to us the aims and the origins of it.
So the BGF Foundation actually came out of the core principle that BGF as an entity is trying to support, which is fill the funding gap. So we obviously have been filling the funding gap through our investments in the SME and the growth space. And when we started thinking that we've gotten to a fair scale, how do we now create a more meaningful impact through the profits that we're generating and the scale that we have created? And then the idea came about, well, fundamentally, our success is also dependent on our ability to work in the communities, as I was talking about earlier, and to be recognized as actually a champion for their well-being as well. So then the question came, well, can we then have a similar structure wherein we use our resources, which is our funding, our network, our talent, to be solving the challenge of the smaller charity space. So a smaller charity or a medium-sized charity often gets overlooked when it comes to larger grants. They often also are unable to get funding where they can utilize it the way that they see fit. So that was the purpose behind the BGF Foundation, which is how do we use our same funding structure to support this small to medium-sized charity space. Now, when it came to what we should be supporting, I think fundamentally it was really critical for us to understand what do the stakeholders in this particular objective need, and that is our employees and our shareholders. So we went out to them and did a big consultation, and what came out were two things. First is young people who are facing disadvantage.
Yeah.
And so we started targeting charities in the first year in just trying to understand what are the challenges that they're trying to solve, what kind of support do they need in terms of network and leverage. From there, the second year, we started refining this and making this more clearer, because young people involve still quite a large chunk, and disadvantage also could mean many different things.
Yeah.
So that's when we started thinking through, well, ideally where we want to be is people who are either young entrepreneurs or essentially people who are getting the support from the charities in order to have social mobility. And we started looking for businesses or charities that are supporting either enterprises or education or mental health and physical health. And right now we have a total pot of 1.5 million, and we have deployed over half of that across 17 different charities, smaller grants and bigger grants. And the way that we're thinking about it is, yes, we are providing the funding, but also we have the BGF employees who often play a role in providing solutions to these charitable organizations. We are inviting our portfolio companies to be part of the solution as well. So, for example, one of the charities we support is called LTSP. So their fundamental support system is that young people from backgrounds where they are unable to get into businesses like NatWest, for example, how do we train them in order to speak really well on the different interviews that they are going to go through and really build that kind of confidence that they need to do well in these interviews? So we've had a number of BGF employees, but also partners from our portfolio who've gotten on these training calls with these younger people and trained them about, here's what your interviewer is going to ask you. Here's how you can conduct yourself. It's really helping them shape this narrative. And that has a really long-term impact, because once you get into a job and you really feel secure about it, then it does transform the way you grow, and your generational wealth also grows.
Totally. It's the biggest thing you can do for your social mobility jobs, isn't it? It's massive. What does LTSB stand for?
Leadership through sports and business. So they think about how can they grow young people through utilization of sports and business as a way to social mobility, essentially.
And BGF have cornerstoned the foundation with sort of 1.5 million as well, right?
Yeah.
Give us an example of some of the other charities that are supported through it then.
So one of the charities another charity that we support is called My Bank. Their whole focus is financial literacy amongst younger people or younger generations. So they work a lot with schools in helping students understand things like what is a saving account, what is a checking account, how do you build a budget. And the idea over there is that if you look at the level of financial literacy across even adults who are working, it's fairly low. And it all starts at the time of school. So they are filling the gap that sometimes, your parents are unable to fill because of different reasons, in helping people prepare for the future and becoming more financially literate. And I think that's also having a really long-term impact on the students, because then they feel more confident, and then they feel like, well, yes, if I have to go to college, this is probably a way that I can save and secure. So that's another one of our charities.
And speaking of this, like, ESG is obviously a growing area, right? So what was your advice be to someone who's thinking, this sounds an interesting space, somebody in their early 20s perhaps, what would you advise they do when it comes to ESG?
I think every role that they will go will have an opportunity to create an impact across E, S, and G. The first thing is to fundamentally understand that wherever you go, you should be aware of how you are using your own skill set to make the world a better place. It's corny, but it's actually true. So the second thing is, like, if you are really passionate about ESG as an area, then it's useful to understand, is there a specific topic that I really want to learn? So for
Yeah.
example, we've seen a huge rise in people changing their skill sets to become environmental scientists.
Yeah.
Or we've seen people who are really going towards gender equity studies. So there is a question about, well, do you want to really specialize in an area? How do you then change your skill set and become that particular individual? And the third kind of individual is something like myself, which is you start working in a space, but you start understanding that where I drive the most motivation and passion is seeing my impact on X.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I'm not theoretically an expert in this space, I'm going to invest the time in becoming better and practically learning this.
Yeah.
So what I've seen people doing is, like, people who are young CFOs, they want to make a difference. They've learned everything that they can about financial accounting, but they want to make a transformation within their own businesses. So they start learning about ESG as a side project almost, and
Yes.
implementing those from a really practical way into the business. And sometimes I think that is the most sustainable way, because people who have ability to influence different stakeholders within the business, if they are championing it, it will be a lot more authoritative, but
Yeah.
also a lot more long-term.
What did you start out doing?
So I,
Tell us about your journey here.
oh God.
And how long have you been at BGF for? We didn't
So
do-
2.5 years. So
Yeah.
I've been with BGF for 2.5 years. So I grew up in India, which was fantastic. And my father was in the army. So I spent most of my time going to very small random places in India.
He was what, sorry?
He was in the army. So
Oh,
he was
he's
an
in the
officer
army,
in
yeah.
the army. So we were in different areas of India. And then one of the things that I think both of them wanted was financial security for myself. But nobody outside of my family had ever not been either a teacher or an army officer. So I then went on to do my education and fortunately graduated in the middle of the recession, which is the 2010 phase.
Yeah.
So then I was looking around blindly in terms of what do I do next? And I stumbled upon a job at McKinsey. So they had just started opening up their new research center. And I said, you know what, doesn't matter. Let me just join this business. And as I started working for McKinsey, that's where I fundamentally understood that I was working in the healthcare space. And what made me really motivated was that I could, at the end of the day, see my whatever little help in strategy is going to help make somebody's health better. So it was a very people-oriented thing for me.
Yeah.
And then from there, then I invested in my education. I did a master's in international development and pivoted into financial services. So joining another private equity fund called Leapfrog Investment, which was a traditional impact investor.
Okay.
And that was quite fantastic because they invest in emerging markets for people who are living below $10. And after I'd done that for 6 years, I think I had this moment sort of post-COVID where I'm sitting here in London trying to create an impact on people, but how much do I actually know today of somebody who's living in India or somebody who's living in Ghana?
Mhm.
So that's when I transitioned into really wanting to make an impact in the place that I now call home, and sort of including a broader worldview of what people in UK and Ireland are really facing.
Yeah.
So that's how I sort of came to BGF, and it's been really great.
And what was the international development degree in? Master's.
So that was at Columbia University, CIPA, so International Development and Finance. So it was a broad-based one. So that was mostly focusing on how you can finance as a vehicle in international development.
Oh, so I was using finance particularly. Yeah, so explain to us about the term impact investor, because that's something that kind of gets used quite a lot. And I'm sure most investors think they invest for impact, but
Yeah.
the impacts may differ slightly of what they're varying, right?
Yeah. Impact investing fundamentally means a couple of things. First is there is a defined problem you're trying to solve. And the second is that you have credible additionality in actually solving that problem. So, for example, if you are opening a school in a city which already has 300 other schools of high quality, yes, you're providing education, but there isn't a known problem.
Okay.
So there has to be something where the problem exists and it is agreed. That's why a lot of impact investors align themselves with the sustainable development goals to say one of the goals is no poverty, and this is how poverty is defined. So we're investing in
That's
solutions.
the United Nations Sustainable
Yes,
Goals.
the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the second core foundation of an impact investor is your additionality. So anybody can provide capital. What did you do fundamentally to make this solution more impactful? Did you give it scale? Did you give it more quality? Did you give it more robustness? So those are two of the things that I think about from a principles perspective. And the third thing that is coming up is your ability to actually demonstrate this. So just like on ESG side, you have a number of regulatory requirements coming up of what you need to report. On the impact investing side as well, you have to be able to demonstrate credibly about why your investment thesis exists as a way to solve this particular problem. How are you going to identify the right companies to do it? And what is your additionality at the end of the day?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. Any final pearls of wisdom for people thinking about ESG that you haven't mentioned?
Well, the wisdom, I think it's something quite simple, which is most people want to do the right thing. I think there are very few people who are out there who are like, no, I only care about financial success at all costs. Yes,
Yeah.
it will be important. So if you really think about yourself in a leadership position, you have already started thinking about E, S, or G in some shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
The real key that we're looking for, or any investor is looking for, is how credibly are you able to translate that into a strategy?
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is you can no longer just ignore ESG. I mean, yes, there are financial risks, but there are huge non-financial risks as well, which is what ESG is meant to capture. So unless you start looking at the non-financial risks today, you will be limiting your opportunities of growth.
Yeah.
From future funding perspective, etc. And the third is you don't need to be an expert, just like nobody's expecting you to be a climate scientist. There are people within your employee base who would be incredibly passionate about how individuals can grow or how you can become more environmentally positive. Really leverage their thinking. Don't think that in the senior leadership team, I need to be doing this all by myself. It's much better to include the S of the ESG strategy in developing your broader picture.
Brilliant. What a super way to say it.
No worries.
Roshni, thanks very much for coming on BGF Good Growth Podcast.
Thank you, Jimmy.